Hey, Basra Hashem. Today's daf is Masechta Baba Basra daf Tzadik Ches, and we're starting from the Mishnah on the bottom of Tzadik Zayin Amud Beis. Okay, here we go. Mishnah says, "Hamoicher yayin lechaveru." Someone sells wine to his friend, the hechmitz, and it went sour. The purchaser brought it home, and it went sour. The Mishnah tells you that the seller does not have to give a refund. He doesn't have to give a refund. Now, it doesn't tell you when it went sour. Did it go sour, 9 months later? And then you're telling me that even then, the seller does not have to give a refund? Or what happens if it goes sour right away? Does the seller have to give a refund? It's not clear from the Mishnah, okay? But nevertheless, no matter what, the Mishnah says a broad stroke that the seller does not have to give the money back. He's not responsible. If the seller has a name out there that when you buy his wine, it goes sour. So he's like selling these these wines that are go sour very fast. So then the purchaser can say, it's all a mistake, and give me my refund back, because your wine is like some of that milk that goes sour fast. So you give me my money back. But if the seller, the moicher, says, Yayin, we go over here. We go on Aleph, Tzadches. Yayin mevusam ani moichelach. I'm giving you wine that's going to last a very long time, right? The best wine, let's call it. Then chayiv lahamed loy ad hatzeres. Then the wine has to stay fresh until Shavuos time. So if you buy a wine in Sukkot's time, and the guy tells you that this is the best wine, so then he has to guarantee that it's going to stay fresh until Shavuos time. The Yashan, if he's telling you, I'm going to sell you old wine, so the Mishnah says, Mishtel Ishtaked, it has to be at least a year old. A year old is considered old wine. Umiyushan, if he says it's aged wine, so then Mishel Gimel Shanim, it has to be 3 years. 3 years. This should be the third year of its existence. So it was produced 2 years prior, and we'll see that in the Gemara. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yosef Bach Chanina said, you told me that when a seller sells wine and it went sour, so then the seller does not have to give the money back. So how can you explain that? I mean, you bought wine and now it went sour. If it went sour, why shouldn't the seller have to give you the money back? Because the answer is what's happening over here is that it went into the kankanim, the jug belonging to the purchaser. It went to the jug belonging to the purchaser. So the purchaser can say that the seller can say that the fact that the wine went into your jug, there's some like bacteria in your jug that caused the wine to go sour. So it's not my fault, says the seller, because you put the wine that I sold you into your own personal jugs. But if it went to the seller's jug, it was never transferred into the purchaser's jug. So so the purchaser can say, here is your wine, and here's your jug back. I mean, you sold me, I bought a wine, it came in your jug, and it's sour, so here's it back, I want a refund. So that's the difference. When the reason why the seller does not have to give a refund, says the Gemara, because Rabbi Yosef Bach Chanina says, because the purchaser put it into his own jug, and probably the purchaser maybe had a bacteria in his jug that caused the wine to go sour. So he's not entitled to a refund. Says the Gemara. Gemara asks the question. Let's say it was the seller's jug. So you're telling me the seller has to give a refund? Why? The seller can say, I sold you wine, but you should have used it right away. Why did you keep it for months? Most wines spoil. What would be the difference if it was the seller's jug? Who cares? Let the seller say, you should not have kept the wine for so long. Why do I have to give you your money back? Even if it was in my my jugs. And the Gemara, like tzricha, so the ratio of the Mishnah is talking about the amalei limikba, that the purchaser said, I want to buy this wine because I'm using it for cooking. It's like so by saying why he's purchasing it, he wants to use the wine for cooking. He's essentially, the purchaser is saying, I'm buying wine so I can keep it for a long time. Oh, in that case, if it goes sour, then it's because this purchaser put it into his own jug, the seller is not responsible to give the money back. So that's the ratio of the Mishnah. So let's go back to the ratio of the Mishnah. The ratio says someone buys wine from his friend and it went sour. You don't have to. He's not entitled to a refund, even though the purchaser said, "I'm buying this wine so I want it to last for a long time." The reason why there's no refund over here is because the purchaser put it into his own jug. So he's the cause of why it went sour. That's the Gemara's understanding of the Mishnah. Amar Rava, says the Gemara, the question is, why did Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina say our Mishnah is talking about that the purchaser put it into his own in jug, and he also said that he needs the wine to last a long time? Let us say that the reason why there is no refund over here, loikma, we could say, it's bekankanan demoicher. It was in the jug of the seller. So and the purchaser didn't indicate that he wants the wine to last a long time, and he let it last a long time, and therefore that's why the seller doesn't have to give a refund, because could be because the purchaser didn't indicate that he wants the wine to last a long time, and if it goes spoiled in 9 months from now, that's why the seller does not have to give his money back. So why did you say that the Mishnah is talking about where it was transferred into the purchaser's jug? And says the Gemara, Amar Rava said, Mashnisin Kishaisa. The Tani, our Mishnah has a difficulty in it because the end of the Mishnah is hard to understand. Im Yadua Shiene Machmitz Hareze Mekatois. If we know that this person's jugs go sour, if this person's wine goes sour, then the purchaser is entitled to a refund because it's a mistaken purchase. Says the Gemara, why is it a mistaken purchase? If we're talking about that the purchaser did not indicate that he wants the wine to last for a long time, so the seller can say, I don't have to give you a refund, even if my wine goes sour. My wine goes sour after 9 months. And you shouldn't have kept the wine for so long. So why do I have to give you a refund? It must be the Amalei Lemikva, that the end of the Mishnah is talking about that the end of the Mishnah is talking about that the purchaser indicated he wanted the wine to last for a long time. Shma, so that means it proves that the beginning of the Mishnah, where the seller does not have to give a refund, is talking about in a situation where the purchaser said, I want it to be for a long time. And so the question is, why doesn't the seller have to give a refund? It's because the purchaser put it into his own jugs, and his own jugs caused the thing to go sour. Says the Gemara, this is Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina's interpretation. So Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina said, and this is the point, you have to remember this point, that if the purchaser always kept it in the jug of the seller, then you can't blame the purchaser for the wine to go sour. It's the seller's fault that it went sour. Says the Gemara, a fascinating thing. This is an argument against Rabbi Bar Yosef. Rabbi Bar Yosef said, Chamra, wine going sour, mazola de mari gorem. The mazel of the purchaser, that causes it to go sour, even if it's in the seller's jugs. Shnema, v'av ki yain boige geve yoher. Wine can rebel against a haughty master. In other words, an owner that's balgaiva, he could cause his wine to go sour, and that's what the pasuk says in Habakkuk. Well, basically, it's saying that it's possible that the seller sold good wine, and he gave it in his own jugs, the seller's jugs, and the fact that it transferred ownership to the purchaser, that caused it to go sour because the purchaser is like somewhat of a haughty person, and God causes bad things to happen to the haughty person, and therefore he could be blamed for it going sour. That's what Rav Yosef said. Amar Rav Murray. Rav Murray said, like a Gadatik statement. Haiman diyar, if a person is arrogant, right? So he even on his wife, on the people of his household, they don't like him. He might be liked in the street, but in the real where it counts in his own house, they don't accept him. Shnema geva yoher loy yinove. A haughty person is not accepted in his own abode. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda said in the Rav, anybody who imagines himself as a Talmud Chacham, and he's not really as a Talmud Chacham, but he just dresses up like the Talmud Chacham, so he's like an egotistic person. He cannot enter the domain of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in God's, so to speak, neighborhood. Because God can't deal with haughty people. So many things you learn, many ideas you learn about somebody who has a big ego. Number one is Parnasa goes down. Number two, his family doesn't like him. And number three, he cannot enter into God's neighborhood. God can't be around such a person. Says the Gemara, new Gemara. Rava said halacha. A man sells a barrel of wine. A guy gives a barrel of wine on consignment to a grocery store, and the grocery store sells the entire wine and has to give part of the profits to the owner of the wine. So the owner of the wine still owns the wine. It's just that he's using the grocery store to sell his wine. But what happens to skeif apalgait after selling half or a third of the wine, the rest of the wine went sour. Is it the grocery store man's, or is it the owner of the wine's problem? So of course, it's the owner's problem. The owner, because this grocery person is just a consignment. He didn't pay for the wine, so therefore the risk is totally and the loss is on the owner of the wine. The loy amr, this was only said at the loy sholim bebarza of a sholim bebarza loy. If somehow on the barrel of wine that he was selling, the grocery store did not change the spigot of where the location of the spigot on the barrel is. Avashani bebarza, if he messed around with the spigot, so probably his messing around with the barrel of wine caused it to go sour. Then we don't say that he's not responsible. He actually is responsible. The loy amri, and we only say of the loy mata yam b'deshuka, of a mata yam b'deshuka loy. If it was the marketplace, it was the market day, and that's and somehow the grocery guy was not marketing the wine well, and nobody bought it, and then it went sour, then we blame the grocery man, because the fact that we leave it into his grocery, even though he didn't pay for it, but he's responsible to market it, and to the people that market day, people should want to buy the wine because it's destined to be sold it's destined to be sold on the market, and the fact that it didn't sell, it went sour, we blame the grocery man for that. Rava said, again, Haiman the Kabel Chamra Adaitim Mamtelei Parvosa Deval Shvat. Parvosa Deval Shvat is a location. So man said to an owner of wine, I'm going to take your wine, but the owner said, I don't want you to sell it anywhere here. I want you to go to this Parvosa Deval Shvat, a place where if you sell the wine in that place, let's say Hawaii, whatever it is, there I want you to sell the wine because I'm going to get a higher price for the wine. So until the guy traveled to that Parvosa Deval Shvat, Zal, the wine went down in value, and he couldn't get the high price that the owner required, the owner wanted. So then, of course, it's the owner's loss, and the guy can at least cover his expenses, and whatever price, whatever fee he made up, he'll get, because the fact who took the risk, who demanded that the guy only sell it over there, it was the owner of the wine. The guy who's dealing with the wine is just a messenger of the owner of the wine. Therefore, that's his problem. Here's the question: what happens if the wine went sour? Again, we have an owner of the wine, but who's carrying the wine? The guy who's taking it to Bavosa, to Shvat, and it went sour. So it wasn't the price decrease, the price tanked. It was the wine became sour. Amalei Rav Hila Rav Ashi ki avine beik Rav Kahana Amalan. When I learned in the yeshiva of Kahana, chalaloi, that that if it goes sour, then the owner is not fully responsible. In fact, the shliach is responsible, because it's not like Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina. Because Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina, that we learned, it's not like Rabbi Yosef. It's like Rabbi Chia. It's like this person, Rabbi Chia bar Yosef. Right? We learned Rabbi Chia bar Yosef held that whoever's holding on to the wine, his mazel could cause the wine to go sour. So the shliach's mazel caused it to go sour, and that's why. In that case, the owner of the wine is not responsible. It's actually the shliach who has to pay, not like Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina. The Ikadamri, others say, even if it goes sour, it's the owner's problem. Come on, Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina, we paskin like Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina, that when the wine goes sour, it's not the one who's holding the wine that caused it to go sour. It's the owner of it's the owner of the wine that caused it to go sour. So this is a machlekes. Why wine goes sour? It's between Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina and Rabbi Chia bar Yosef. But the magic is Rabbi Chia bar Yosef's opinion is that a person who has an ego could cause the wine to go sour, just because God wants to show him, as the Rajbam explains, that you are trying to make yourself as somebody that you're not. So the wine is going to be something that you think it is. It's going to be something else. So you think it's wine, it's going to turn into vinegar. Yasha Michel Ishtaked, we learned that if it's the seller said, I'm selling you old wine, it has to be at least a year old. We go to Amid Beis. Tana Yasha Adachag. And what's called miyushan? I mean, yusha means aged wine. So aged wine means it's at least 2 years old. And let's say you bought it in Tishrei, so then it has to be the third year. It has to complete the third year in order to be considered aged wine. It has to last through that whole third year to be able to consider aged wine. But if it's going to sour during that third year before Sukkot time, so then the seller is responsible still for it. Now the new Mishnah begins. Let's say you hire a contractor and you give him money and he says he's building you a house. How big does the house have to be? Does it have to be like a house in Back Lawrence, or what is that? What's the deal there? You paid him for a house. He gave you a price. Now, what does he have to deliver? The Mishnah, it's fascinating Mishnah. If a guy paid money to a contractor, that guy is going to build him a house, right? So it depends what you stipulate in the contract, and then we'll tell you how big the house has to be. If you stipulate in the contract the base chasnas lebenoi, that you want to buy a house for your son, he's coming to live next door to you, then you hire the contractor to build you a house. Ubeis almonis lebitoi, right? Or you guaranteed you're buying a spot, let's say, to build a house for, let's say, your daughter lost her husband and she's moving back to her father's house. So then you contracted somebody to buy a space to build a house. So how big does the space have to be, right? How big does the space have to be that he's selling you? Not that he's building it for you. And I want to change that. He's not building it for you. He's just selling you the space, and you stipulated why you're buying it. You're buying it to build a house for your son or to build a house for your daughter. So boina arba meas al sheish. It has to be something that you can build a house on 4 amas by 6 amas. Okay, that's 8 feet by 12 feet. Divrei Mekiva. Rabbi Shmuel says, what kind of house is that? Refes bakihi. That is considered to be like a barn. A barn, that's too small. So it doesn't say what Rabbi Shmuel holds of what the house should be. So then the Mishnah says, okay, if you want to make a barn, so what is the size of a barn? That you build 4 amas by 6. So it's not clear who said what this part of the Mishnah is. Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Shmuel. But anyway, the barn, according to one opinion, is 4 amas by 6 amas. Bias cotton, if you're buying a house for build a small house, let's say a house for a family, sheish al ches, then it's a 6 by 8 amas house. Godol, if you're buying a big house, ches al eser, it's 8 by 10. A big house. Traklin, if you're asking to build a palace, yud al yud, then it's the 10 amas by 10 amas. Rumay kechatzi arke v'chatzi rachbay. The height when you're building the house. Now here, it's actually talking about building the house. So when you're building the house, the height of the house has to be half the total of the length and the width. So let's take a bias cotton. You hired a contractor to build you a small house. Okay. So he has to build you a house that's 6 by 8 amas, but the height has to be, you take 6 plus 8, which is 14. Half of that is 7. So the height has to be 7 amas. Raya Ladavar, how can I prove that's the way you build houses? Rabbi Gamaliel, Shimon Gamaliel, Omer, Kabinyan HaChechel, like the Beis HaMikdash was. The Beis HaMikdash was in such a dimension where the height, I think was 50 amas, was half the length and the width. That was the Heichel. The Heichel. Let's see, you have a picture over here. Okay, so you have 40 by 20. I'm sorry, the 40 by 20 of the Heichel, which was 60, was the half of it was 30 amas. So you can see the picture on the screen over here. So again, 40 by 20. So anytime you're building a house, the height should be half. The building department will require you, according to the Mishnah, to have the height of the building half the length and the width. Says the Gemara. Lama li lemisne. This is a very interesting Gemara. Lama li lemisne. Why does the Mishnah have to say that you're buying a base chaslus lebenoi or base almanis lebita? You're trying to hire somebody to build or buying a place for a house for your son, or a house for your almana daughter, for your widowed daughter. What is that teaching? Why can't you buy a house with your daughter living right next to you? Listen, let the Mishnah say, Beis Chasas Livloi Levita, that you're buying a house right next to you for your son or married daughter to live next to you. Beis Almanis Lebedoi Levita, or you're buying, if your son Loyalenu loses his wife, you're buying for your widowed daughter or for your son who lost his wife. So the Gemara says that the Mishnah is teaching you an interesting point. It's teaching you a side idea. The loy darke, it's not proper that a son-in-law should live in the house of his mother-in-law and right next to him. And that's even though it's contrary to what people do. Why? Because it could lead to something not sneeze, like an affair happening between the mother-in-law and her first son-in-law. It's fascinating. So therefore, a son-in-law should live far away from his mother-in-law. But if Loyalenu, he dies, then the daughter moves back to live with her parents. But the son could live next to his parents. There was a Mussar book called Ben Sira, and sometimes it's quoted in the Talmud. I measured all ideas on a scale. Nothing is lighter than bran. Lighter bran is the cheapest food. The kal mesubin, something even less, less classy, so to speak, is chosan hadar b'beis chama, a son-in-law living in his in-law's house. The kal mechosam, and worse than that, the most, the not good manners is oireach machnis oirach. One guest invites another guest. So it's hard to have one guest and the guest brings along another guest. That's not proper. The kalma oirech, and worse than that is meishiv dava b'tar yishma. People who already give you the answer before you ask the question. They're impulsive people. Shnema meishiv dava b'tar yishma ivelis hi loy uchlima. Someone who is very impulsive answers before he finishes hearing from you is considered a fool, and it's an embarrassment. So we see that the idea the Mishnah is teaching you is that a son-in-law should not live next to his mother-in-law. Anyway, Rabbi Shmuel Leimer Refes Baksa he writes says the Gemara Refes Baka man Ktanila. Who's talking in the Mishnah about this Refes Baka? Ikeda Amar Rabbi Shmuel Ktanila, Ikeda Amar Rabbi Kiva Ktanila. Ikeda Amar Rabbi Kiva Ktanila. It's Rabbi Kiva is continuing. Rabbi Kiva is saying that a house for your son-in-law should be 4 by 6 amas, and Rabbi Shmuel says, that's a barn. Rabbi Kiva says, even though if you consider a bomb, sometimes a person can make a mini house. They have these mini houses in China that like they can make these houses like studio houses. That's by 4 by 6 amas. You consider it a place for an animal, but you could put a human there. That's Rabbi Kiva's explanation in the Mishnah. And others say it's Rabbi Shmuel saying. This is what Rabbi Shmuel is saying. Rabbi Shmuel is saying a house has to be bigger than that. And if you want to make a barn, it has to be 4 amas by 6. Rabbi Kiva says a house is 4 amos by 6. Maybe a barn is even smaller than that. So they're arguing in both areas. Anyway, that's how you learn pshat in the Mishnah. Traklin, if it's a palace, yud al yud. My traklin, kupsa beivarde. It's like a traklin is like a big house with a lot of windows that you put roses. Tane, we learned in a brisa, the kanter shtei mesrael yidbeis. My kanter, a kanter house is you have to build it by 12 by 12. My tarbitz aponde. It's like a house that comes in front of the noble's house. Somehow it's like a sunroom or something like that. That has to be built by 12 by 12. Okay, let's just we'll do just one more piece over here and then we'll stop in half a minute. Okay, so Ruma kechutzi arkev chatziyar rayl dav Shimon gamekvin nechech rayl dav mankatan leik dam Rab Shimon geklan hake kama rayl dav menayin Rab Shimon gabon hakol kim binyan ha'echal. Rab Shimon ben Gamliel is saying that the binyan ha'echal was the proof that you make the height half the width of. If you look at the base of Mikdash, that's the proof that you make the height half the length and half the width. That's Rabbi Shimon Gamliel explanation in the Mishnah. The Ika the Amar, others learn other pshat in the Mishnah. Tanakama k'tanallah. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel atui komatama v'hachei kamalei l'tanakama. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel interrupted the Tanakama's words. Raya menayin. What do you want to bring a proof from? The bina heichel atikuli ama kabina heichel avdi. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's his opinion is that the height doesn't have to be so high; it could be less. And Rabbi Shimon Gamliel was talking like in a question to the Tanakama. You say that the height has to be half the width and half the length, half the width and half the length. Not everybody builds his house like the base of Mikdash. Tanya, we learned in a brisa, the height has to be the length of the beams. So v'lema rumay karachbai. Why don't you say the height has to be the width of the house? Because if you look at this picture, they would put this is, by the way, a tarbitz, and now if you look at this picture, they put the beams across the width. So if you want to know how the height has to be, it has to be the height of the width of the house. So why does the brisa say that height has to be the width of the beams? Just say the height has to be the width. And the Gemara is answering is sometimes the width starts out narrow and it widens at the top. So the best way to determine the height of the house has to be the size of the beams. That's what the Mishnah says. And sometimes the beams are placed into the wall. So you have to make it even the part that's punched into the wall. And that's how we're going to end the Gemara. When it gets to the higher part, that's when it spreads out. And that's what we're referring to. There's places where you grooves, where you put the beams, so you count that as part of the dimensions of how much you have to make, how big you have to make the height of the house. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we've been able to finish Daf Tzaddik Ches.